On the 11th of June 1955, during the 24 Hours of Le Mans motorsport race at Circuit de la Sarthe in France, something tragic happened that will forever be considered the worst accident in motorsport history. In this video, I'll give you all the details about what went on that fateful day, and of course, some shocking things that you wouldn't believe happened, like how the race didn't stop. Don't go too far, this story is a big one. 69 years ago, on a sunny June day, the queue for the Le Mans 24-hour race was bubbly and filled with expectation from all walks of life as people trooped in to watch their favourite sport. Drivers of high calibre like Stirling Moss, Mike Hawthorn and Juan Manuel Fangio would grace the tracks, as well as the top car manufacturers at the peak of their powers. Car brands like Ferrari, who were the reigning champions of Le Mans, and Jaguar, who had put all their resources into reclaiming the trophy they had won 2 years before. For Mercedes-Benz, there were high hopes with the new 300 SLR. This was because of its ultra-lightweight magnesium alloy body, something different at the time. To give them an even higher chance of winning, it was being driven by a lead car pairing of Fangio and Moss. To go with the grandeur of the event, the opening stages of this race didn't disappoint. Although it is traditionally an endurance event, Jaguar and Mercedes treated the race like more of a sprint, with Hawthorn and Fangio swapping lap records repeatedly. Now, this was more than a race to Hawthorn, as he was boiling with serious animosity against the German manufacturer following the death of a close relative during World War II. This made it an ultimate goal to crush the Mercedes challenge. The race had been going well. The spectators were cheering and whooping for their favourite racers, and every driver made it look absolutely effortless on track. However, in the third hour of the race, on the 35th lap, something disastrous happened. Now, before we go any further, if you like our content, don't forget to like, subscribe and turn on that notification bell, as we've got a massive lineup of F1 stories you won't want to miss. Now, there were so many stories and blames and counter-blames surrounding the few seconds that led to motorsport's worst disaster. But don't worry, because in this video, we've gathered some indisputable facts. Hawthorn, locked in a brutal battle with Fangio, overtook the British driver Lance Macklin before realising that he was going towards the pits. He veered across the road, braking sharply. Macklin took preventative action, drifting off the track to the right before coming back across it and into the path of the Mercedes and the Frenchman Pierre Levay. But at 150 miles per hour, Levay didn't have the time to react, and his right front wheel rose up on the back of Macklin's car. Levay's Mercedes was flung into the air and shot off the track. There, it collided with an embankment and disintegrated, flinging Levay himself furiously back onto the track, where he died instantly. Now, because of the impact, the debris, including the car's engine block, all flew into the crowd. His bonnet lid scythed through the spectators for over 100 meters, killing those in its path. The rear of the car burst into wild flames. The magnesium alloy added to the intensity of those flames. It was a crash like no other. As you can imagine, carnage in the crowd soared. Screams, tears, fear and tension, and any other emotion to describe the carnage. Including Levay, 83 spectators were killed and hundreds were injured. It was a horrific sight. Hawthorn, who had overreached the pits, came back a lap later with tears in his face. The injured and deceased were carried using advertising banners, while others frantically searched for their loved ones. Now, what happened next was arguably even more shocking. The race continued. John Fitch, an American F1 driver and Levay's co-driver, was standing with Levay's wife when the accident happened. He urged Mercedes to withdraw from the race. If not for anything, he argued, the PR disaster for a German manufacturer would be seen to be carefree and nonchalant about French bloodshed, and definitely be catastrophic, especially just a decade after the guns had fallen silent in Europe. You'd expect them to withdraw immediately, but no. Despite the reason Fitch gave, the higher-ups' decision and clearance to retire from the race were received after all the company directors had been contacted and given their permission at around midnight. The remaining Mercedes cars were called in quietly from the race at 1:45 a.m, with the crowd at its most reduced. At the same time, a senior member of the Mercedes team approached Jaguar to suggest that they too might like to retire from the race in an act of togetherness. But the Jaguar team leader, Lofty England, declined. Yes, he said no. Now, it's probably unfair to condemn England's actions and that of the Le Mans organisers' actions if you're comparing it to modern standards, because they had their reasons. The Le Mans organisers' justification was that cancelling the race would have caused the alarmed crowd to go berserk, especially from the shock of what they had just experienced, and gridlock the roads and make emergency services difficult. On the other hand, it would not have been difficult to close the car parks and cancel it at 3 a.m, when the crowds were at their fewest. But what do you think? Was this an inhumane or sensible reason to continue the race until the middle of the night so people were somehow calmer, or stop the race altogether when Mercedes pulled out? Now, understandably, some people might want to point the blame at Hawthorn for what happened. It wouldn't have happened if he hadn't chosen to overtake the other driver, or if he hadn't been so hell-bent on settling the scores with the German manufacturer, because it was Germany. So yes, it may not have happened, but can we actually blame him? The next thing that happened also raises eyebrows. Hawthorn and his co-driver, Ivan Webb, won the race with a record average speed of 106 miles per hour. Hawthorn was still shocked after the race, although an inappropriate moment caught him smiling and sipping post-victory champagne. That was captured by a photographer and appeared in the French magazine L'Auto Journal with a resentful caption. It translated to your health, Mr. Hawthorn." As expected, in the days and weeks that followed, people looked for answers, and it stretched into months and even years. The official inquiry cleared all drivers that participated in the race of any fault, and instead pointed out that the track wasn't fit for a race of that kind and of the speed taking place. The course had been built in 1923, and at that time cars had a top speed of 60 miles per hour. There had only been minor adjustments since then, despite the fact that the cars taking part that year, their speed had doubled. But who and what exactly was supposed to be blamed? Hawthorn, that had cut in front of Macklin, or Macklin himself, who was trying to avoid slamming into the pits? Many people claimed that Hawthorn was to blame for braking too hard after deliberately cutting in front of Macklin. There were reports that right after the accident, Hawthorn had been crying and admitting that it was his fault. And if that was actually the case, he changed his story immediately and denied that he was to blame. Hawthorn supporters and Jaguar counterclaimed that both Macklin and LeVay, who had been a 50-year veteran when he died, lacked the competence for that kind of high-speed racing. Regardless of whether it was a matter of competency or not, it wasn't really the right thing to say for a man that had just lost his life. Things became messy, shameful, and embarrassing later. In 1958, Hawthorn's autobiography reaffirmed his claim that the accident wasn't his fault, and Macklin suggesting that this was Hawthorn directly shifting the blame on him and implicating him, sued Hawthorn for libel. The claim was still unresolved one rainy day in January 1959 when Hawthorn was killed driving his Jaguar on the Guildford bypass. And the tragic irony, he was overtaking a Mercedes at the time. The accident led to an immediate temporary ban on motorsports in France, Switzerland, Spain, West Germany, and other nations until racetracks could be guaranteed to be brought to a higher safety standard. Switzerland only lifted its ban in 2022. At the end of the season in question, Macklin and Fitch retired, as well as a number of other drivers involved in the race. Fangio never raced at Le Mans ever again, and for Mercedes, they withdrew from motorsports entirely and only returned to the sport 2 decades later in 1987. Now, although the story centred of course around the drivers, it wouldn't be fair not to mention those that we should be remembering. The 84 people whose lives were brutally cut short. People who had left their homes one sunny June morning to watch the sport they loved, never came home. Tragic indeed. Now, Mercedes' withdrawal had already been decided before the race and not because of the accident. Then, after returning to motorsport, initially as an engine supplier, Mercedes went on to win the 1989 Le Mans race in partnership with Sauna Motorsport. They also competed in the championship during the 1990s as a works team before withdrawing for a second and final time in 1999 after a series of spectacular but not fatal crashes of the Mercedes-Benz CLR. The 1955 tragedy still remains a painful one in the memory of those who experienced it and in the history of motorsport. What do you think? Who do you think was to blame, Hawthorne or the track? Do you think LeVay's legacy was honoured later? Share your thoughts in the comments below and don't forget to like, subscribe and ring that notification bell to stay updated on the best rides of the rich and famous. See you in the next one.